Perfect. Everybody, welcome to the League of Inches podcast. Myself, Joel, your host, and I've got a very special guest, one of the smartest men in the game, in my opinion, Mr. Bernie Gurr. Bernie, how are you? How's things? What have you been up to?
Yeah, I'm really good, Joel. Very good, mate. I'm actually in Australia at the moment on a vacation, so out here to see family and friends, which is always terrific because this is home. I live in California now. I'd lived in California before I took the Eels job at the end of 2016, so I have a home now. I have two adult children back in California, but my wife and I, we try and get out here as regularly as we can, particularly now that COVID is over. So mate, just out here on a vacation and. As you probably would have predicted, I made it around the end of the NRL season and around the playoffs. So good timing.
Perfect timing for yourself. So I just witnessed two of the big guns show that I'll flex their muscles on the weekend, and we're going to have probably the two best teams of the season in the grand final, which is a good thing, I guess, for rugby league fans. We'll see a cracking game. What are you doing over in America? Are you still part of the game over there, or?
Well, I'm not, although for a couple of months earlier this year, I was on the United States Rugby League Board of Directors. They'd asked me to go on there, and I was happy to go on. What I found, though, when I got on there, they don't have any executive office in the USARL. It's pretty much the 9 directors do all the administrative work that would normally be done by the full-time staff in a usual organisation. So they're at a very embryonic stage. Look, they're terrific people. But it was requiring too much of my time. I've got a few other little things that I like to do, and I also had to travel to Australia in that time and go back, and I couldn't do any work for them in that time. So I just said to them, look, I don't think I can at the moment. I can't give you what you need in the amount of hours and time you need. But I'm totally supportive of what they're doing. They're terrific people. The couple of months or 3 months that I was on the board, I really like the people who are on there. Their heart is totally dedicated to promoting the game of rugby league. And I said, look, anywhere I can help you around a consulting basis, I'm only too happy to help you. So who knows, down the track, it may happen again. But I'm not on that at the moment, but I support them 100%.
Mate, if you need to give them my details, I'll go with you as a team and we can go in and get this done and promote rugby league over in America. What a job that would be. So I'll put my hand up and say, include me, count me in. Can you inform everyone over there just how, I guess, rugby league is shaping in America and how it's looking over there at the moment? I guess a lot of us basically just put everything into the NRL circle. We're probably a bit arrogant in the terms of how we view the game here and how good it is. But can you give us a little bit of an update with how things are looking over there?
Yeah, look, it's very much at an embryonic stage. As I said, there's no one working full-time in an administrative capacity in the United States around rugby league, whether it's in the clubs or the leagues. The players are totally amateur. The coaches and admin people that run the clubs are totally amateur. So this is very much like the clubs over there are very much like A-grade rugby league clubs here in junior league football. And it's at a very, very embryonic stage. The fact that the NRL took their opening games there, I think, has probably clouded the reality of the sport in America to most Australian people. And look, no one would love rugby league to succeed more in the United States than me. I've supported the game. I've been a fan for 50 years. I love the game. I've worked in the game. I've played in the game. And I absolutely love it. It is the greatest game. But the reality is, in America, you're dealing with the most sophisticated sports market in the world. The best and brightest sports executives are working in the American sports marketplace, at least some of the bulk of them, whether it's the NFL, Major League Baseball, the National Hockey League, the National Basketball Association, Major League Soccer, the college sporting programs, the Olympic sporting programs they have. All these people are working very, very hard over there to maintain the interest of the American people. And whilst people in rugby league think, well, number one, we've got a great game. They love the physicality and the athleticism. And, we should be able to get a little piece of that 330 million population marketplace. In many ways, that's a simplistic and naive analysis because it is the most sophisticated marketplace in the world. And when you're related to the National Rugby League and what they're trying to do over there, they went there, and Peter V'landys and Andrew Abdo were very specific. They went there to generate another revenue source, being gambling revenue. And Nothing wrong with that. That's a valid objective if that's the way that they want to take the game. But they're after the gambling revenue. They had a little sub-objective, which about a month out, where they said, "Oh, we'll run a combine, see if we can get some players to come back to the NRL." But as you'll notice, both of those objectives, and the main one being gambling, it's all about what's coming back to the NRL in Australia. Either gambling revenue coming back or potentially a couple of players coming back to the NRL. It really had nothing to do, and there was never any mention from the NRL about assisting the growth of the game in America. I know for a fact that the NRL had not reached out to the USARL, the governing body of the game in America, until about 2 months before the event occurred. They certainly didn't reach out to them before they announced that the event would occur. Now, I look at things pragmatically and realistically. I would love the game of rugby league to be a raging success in the United States, but you're competing with a very, very sophisticated market. And when you're going after the gambling revenue in the United States, you've got these, very smart minds in the sports business over there saying, "Oh, well, now that we have legalized sports gambling, which has been opened up since 2018, you used to have 2 states, Nevada and with Las Vegas and New Jersey with Atlantic City. Those 2 states, it's been opened up now to about 35 to 38 states that now have legalized sports betting. And that's what I think the NRL had their eye on.
Yeah.
There's a couple of issues with that, though. All these bright executives over there in the existing sports that are intrinsic to the United States and their citizens, they're trying to get that gambling revenue now too that they never were able to get before. So they're trying to put in place revenue streams of themselves, and they know the market, and they're dealing with sports that are already loved by the American population. And the other thing too is if you want people to bet on the NRL, they have to be aware the sport exists, and the sport has a very, very low awareness factor in the United States. Like, I tell everybody I know it's the greatest game. All my friends and relatives, I drive them nuts telling them what a great game it is. But the bulk of the population over there have no idea the game exists. You talk about rugby league and they think, "Oh, yeah, rugby. Oh, isn't that what they play a little bit in the colleges?" I say, "Well, no, it's not. That's rugby union. That's a different game." "Oh, I don't understand the difference." So you have a great awareness problem. And if you want to get people to gamble on anything, they've got to be aware it exists first. The NRL's Las Vegas game was, I think, the greatest preseason promotion I've seen, actually, in Australia, not in America. It had no cut through in traditional media. There's very, very few people more aware of rugby league now than before those games. You've got some people in Vegas that are, because they live there. All the people that live and work there were probably aware of it. But it had no real cut through in traditional or social media in the United States. The TV numbers were less than 100,000, which basically in American TV means no one's watching. Now, I don't say this happily, Joel, because nothing would please me more than for rugby league to succeed. And I went to Vegas. The NRL put on a great party. It was fantastic. Myself and my family and friends, we were there for 3 days. It was great. I think as an event, the NRL did really, really well to logistically get that event on. And it was a great event. But it was a great event for the NRL in Australia. It didn't really do anything in the United States. Now, again, doesn't make me happy to say that, but that's my pragmatic reality. That's really what happened. Now, should they keep going with it? They have a 5-year deal. If they want to keep going with it, they should. They've got to understand, though, in order to get the American people interested in our game, they have to be aware it exists. You need a big awareness campaign. Major League Rugby, they started in the United States about 5 or 6 years ago. They're going broke. The LA team just folded. Major League Soccer started in 1996 because I worked at the World Cup Soccer in 1994 as their director of finance. We left $70 million to promote, a lot of money back in 1994 to promote the game of soccer. And the second part of that was that we would start a Major League Soccer competition in the United States, which they did in 1996. Now, with all that and the fact that it's the world game, only in the last 5 years or so, and probably a little before that with the introduction of David Beckham and now Lionel Messi, are they starting to get any real traction as a legitimate second-tier sport. They're not a tier one sport. They're not up there with hockey and NFL, college football, basketball. They're not, or baseball. They're not up there. They're a tier two sport, as I would define it. So even that it's the world game with all the money, with 25 years of a competition, Only now have they got their place very solidly in at that what I call a tier 2 level. So rugby union, not working. Soccer, now getting some traction at a tier 2 level. It will never take over from American football. Number one sport in America by a mile is the NFL. It's an absolute economic behemoth. And the number 2 sport in America now is college football. So football, American football, just absolutely rules, and they are absolutely flying in the United States. The money they're now getting from the streaming services, Amazon paying them billions for a Thursday night game. So the reason I'm saying all this is not to be, downcast on rugby league going into the US. You just got to be realistic, and you have to analyze the marketplace, and you have to see what your competitors are doing. And as you would know, sports are very much, they're intrinsic and inherent to a city, to a community, to a state. We've been going for 115 years, and we can't convince Victoria, South Australia, and Western Australia to like rugby league better than AFL. Yeah. So to think that we could go into the United States and become a major player in the United States is absurd. Yeah. It's not going to happen. Now, does it potentially have a chance over time to become, a tier 2 sport or a tier 3 sport? Potentially, but I think the rugby union experience and the Major League Soccer experience would suggest it would take years and years, and it would take millions and millions, and I mean millions of dollars to make that happen. Now, does that mean the NRL shouldn't do this Las Vegas thing for another 5 years? No, I think they should do it because, from what I could gather, with all the Australian journalists over there and all the wonderful publicity coming back, that it was a great event. And it was a great event, but it was a great event for Australia. You were preaching to the converted. Yeah. 90% of Australians, you were preaching to the converted. I think there was another 10%, maybe it was even 20% of the people that were aware of that, and all the wonderful publicity coming out through the Australian media back to the Australian sporting marketplace. I think that set the course for this year's NRL competition being magnificent. Yeah. So I don't think that was their objective. Their objective was to go over there and kickstart the gambling revenue piece of it. But the wonderful offshoot of it all was the promotion of the game back here is what I could see. Look at the crowds this year. They've been better than ever. Yeah. The television ratings are through the roof. They're better than ever. Clubs are getting more corporate dollars invested in them. Clubs are now profitable. The season this year has been brilliant. The on-field play has been brilliant, and the off-field for all the clubs has been probably better than ever. So, and I think a real kickstart for that came from the Las Vegas venture. So you may, even if you didn't want to do anything in America, it was a magnificent promotion for the game in Australia. So I know that's sort of a long-winded answer around what's happening with rugby league in the United States, but look, I'm trying to be realistic. And I said I'd love it to become a bigger sport there. And, I'm its biggest fan over there, and I got a whole group of family and friends to go out to the Vegas game. But it's going to be a very, very slow burn.
Yeah. It sounded like it was a very expensive holiday in a way for the game to go out there, promote it. And as you said, there's probably some serious question marks they've got to ask themselves at the moment in terms of just how all in do they go with this venture? Is it something that they see themselves over time really breaking into that market at some point, and the percentage of which they want to break into that market? Because as you've explained, you're up against a lot.
You're up against a very, very sophisticated market. And the fact that it's a huge, huge market, that argument, well, we only want to get 5%, that doesn't wash, doesn't work that way. The interesting thing is I've seen nowhere, and I try and stay up to date with the Australian traditional media and social media around rugby league, and I've seen no one ask a couple of basic questions. How much did it cost? Did we make any money? Did we make money or lose money? That's an obvious question that no one's asked. Secondly, have we, if your objective was to get gambling revenue, how did you go? Have we got any gambling revenue out of year one of the venture? Now, if they said, well, no, at least they've answered you, and whether they've met that's their objective, not ours. That's their objective. And you'd know whether they've met it. But the Australian media, no one has asked some fundamental questions about, because, with all due respect, they drank the Kool-Aid on the whole thing. And look, again, I'm not meaning to be critical. I'm just trying to have a pragmatic analysis of the event. And as I said, it was great. I'm going again. We're organising to go again next year because it's a great event. It's a great party. We had a great time out there. So we will definitely go. So I'm not downgrading and actually, as I said, I give them great praise for logistically pulling off that event. Having been in sports and I was involved in the World Cup soccer in '94, and then I've had 2 stints as a CEO at an NRL club. I know what goes into those sort of events, and they did a brilliant job. It was really, really good event. It was a great party, but there's some questions to be asked around whether they achieved their strategic objectives.
I didn't get to go this year, and I don't have any plans in the future to go, unfortunately, at this stage. But sponsors out there, listen up. Let's get over there and enjoy the week that is of that, because it sounds amazing, and I definitely want to experience it. I want to talk to you a bit about bringing things back onto shore. Obviously, a mad Para fan I am, and I think it's interesting. And I want to talk to you and hopefully ask you to get your CEO hat back on for a little bit here, because Parramatta for mine has had a pretty dreadful year. They've been pretty poor in a number of circumstances in and around that club, both on the field and off the field. I want to get your opinion and your thoughts around. Let's start off with this season, and I guess since the grand final, where it seemed to have gone basically off a cliff. It just seems to, for a lot of fans out there, it's sort of the grand final was used as a success instead of winning the thing. It was thought like it was, oh yeah, it made the grand final. This is great, and then everything seems to have been forgotten about, and there's been a lot of pats on the back in a way. Put your CEO hat on, please, and can you explain to us what sort of goes on for a club behind the scenes in this 24-month period, I guess? And for you, does it seem as bad as it suggests things are to us, the fans?
Well, there's an old saying in sports: it's never as good as it seems, but it's never as bad as it seems.
Yeah.
Because we get very emotional with sports, and if we're doing well, the fans think you're doing outstandingly well, and if you're doing bad, they think you're doing outstandingly bad. So they sort of push their emotions to either end of the spectrum. Look, Parramatta had a really good period from, the period when I was there, 17, 18 and 19, it was a lot about rebuilding the club. There was a lot of trust that had been broken in the club. There'd been, a lot of governance issues, salary cap problems. Some of the executives had been disqualified by the NRL. The Leagues Club had been involved. So you had this group, the Leagues Club and the Footy Club, they needed repairing. And I think, that was, under Max Donnelly's leadership as chairman, then he brought me in as CEO and he brought in a new board of directors. That bit has been set on a good path. And I think, look, from 18, we ran last when I was there, but it was part of the whole cleanup process at the time. And we held our nerve. The press were calling for Brad to be sacked and major changes and all this. And we said, look, no, just hold the nerve. We're on a rebuilding process here anyway. 19, the ship was righted. We made it back to the playoffs, and they've been there 20, 21, 22. Now we've missed 23 and 24. And I think, they had some good fortune as they worked their way towards the grand finals. But I think it was a really good job by Brad Arthur and a really good job by the club and a really good job by the players to get to that grand final. Yeah. When you're not inside the walls, it's very hard to know all the little 1% that you see or don't see. I think, injuries have been a problem for the Eels. I think, you could potentially say their recruitment and retention, maybe in 23, they relied on the fact that they'd been to the grand final in 22. And that's not an uncommon situation. You put trust in people that have delivered a good result. And, let's face it, getting to the grand final in 2022 is a great result for everybody in the club, from the board, the management, the coaching staff, the players. That getting to a grand final, as we all know, is brutally difficult. So I think they all did a very, very good job to get to that grand final. And things started to unravel a bit in 23. And then, of course, 24, Mitchell Moses getting hurt was huge. Some of our players getting older, that hurt. Some of our players getting wounded. Mitchell got hurt. Jermaine Hopgood, he finally made the Origin, and then he got hurt. To me, I know he's a quite sort of achiever within the playing ranks, but I think he's a real leader from what my observation and what people tell me. Junior Barlow got hurt. Josh Hodgson didn't deliver. you add all these things together, and it's very easy in the NRL to go from 4th to 14th.
Yeah.
And so that's Parramatta, but everything's relative because that's why they call it a competition. A lot of the other clubs started a rebuilding process in 2021, 22, or 23. For example, the Bulldogs, they started their rebuild in 22. The Dragons are now rebuilding. The Titans are rebuilding under Des Hasler. The Tigers, whilst they ran last, they're still out there in the marketplace for the young players. They're still in the marketplace for a Jerome Luai.
Yeah.
So what's this all mean? It means that Parramatta have been impacted by, I think, some recruitment and retention issues. Mitchell Moses being out is monstrous. And whilst, Gutho's played well, but this year, he's amazing, Gutherson, when you look at what he does for the club, and he's always wounded, that. His contribution has been huge. It'd be very easy for me to say, it was a disaster. Well, it's not where Parramatta needs to be. But if you take one step back, Parramatta is still a very stable club, which is not what you would have said about Parramatta 10 years ago.
Yeah.
They're stable. They're financially very, very strong. Their commercial division under Andrew McHale, working for Jim Sarantinos, they're very successful. So the club is very stable financially. They have arguably the best week-to-week home ground in the league with CommBank. It's amazing. It's the envy of the league, except for those some of those regional clubs, the Brisbane's and North Queensland's, Roosters. They got very good stadiums too. But I personally think CommBank is the right size stadium for an NRL team. 30,000. It's a great facility. They've got a centre of excellence coming at Kellyville. So I think for Parramatta supporters, I think they can recover. Look, Brad Arthur leaving this year was an issue really from the moment they started losing a few games early in the year. Became a massive issue around the club. And that stuff can affect the club. Some clubs it doesn't affect, some clubs it does. I think that did affect the Eels. Then on top of that, Mitch Moses getting hurt, Junior Barlow, your two leaders not playing much. And I think it just snowballed. And I think, look, I'm a fan of Brad's. I worked with Brad for 3 years. I think when history's written about Parramatta and his tenure as head coach, I think it'll look very favourably on the Brad Arthur era. Now, does that mean they needed a change? I'm not between the walls. I don't know that. All I know is at 18 we ran last, and I said, my view to the board and our management team was, hold your nerve. We're in a rebuild here. Don't get nervous. We've got some things in play there, and we ended up bringing in at that time, I think Sean Lane. We brought in Blake Ferguson. We brought in Micah Sevo. I think there was one other player. We brought in 4 or 5 players that really made a difference to the roster and made us a bit bigger, a bit younger, a bit better. So I wouldn't be getting overly, exasperated by it. I don't know Jason Riles, but everything I've heard about him, what I've seen with him so far, he's been in clubs that know what success looks like, and more importantly, he's been in clubs that knows what it's like to prepare for success. A famous coach once said, everybody wants to win. I want people that are prepared to win. In other words, are they going to do the preparation to win? Don't just tell me you want to win. Show me that you're going to prepare to do the preparation day in, day out, like the Melbourne Storm and the Penrith Panthers do. Their training attitudes, their standards, all that. He's seen all that. He's worked at the Roosters, Storm. He's worked with the Wallabies. The English rugby union team, not the Wallabies. So, look, he knows what success looks like. So I think we have to give him some time to put it in place. What I will say to Eels fans is I think it's going to be a bit of a slower burn. Yeah. I don't think they're going to go to the top 4 next year when I look at their roster and I look at the other clubs. But would a 8th to 10th place be out of place? No, it may not be. I think, they've drastically got to improve their defence. You can't give up 30 points a game. It's just not going to get you anywhere near the 8. You're not going to be a competitive football team. And it's often a sign of attitude. I think the last 8 weeks or so under Trent Barrett, the team, they didn't throw the towel in. Like you've often seen teams that drop off and they can't make the playoffs. It's mathematically impossible, which is where the Eels were basically 8 weeks out, 9 weeks out. But Barrett and the players, whilst they didn't give us any 80-minute games, we've got some 60s and 70s, but they never gave us an 80-minute. They had a dig.
Yeah,
I didn't feel like that the players were giving up. They weren't. So I think you can start afresh. I think they're going to have a good, nice, long off season because they didn't make the playoffs. Riles will make some changes. I think that'll be a breath of fresh air throughout the playing group and the club generally. So, as I said, I don't think they're going to go straight in and finish third or fourth next year, because when you look around the league, these clubs are getting better. The Bulldogs will be better. The Dragons will be better. The Titans will be better. Tino Fa'asuamaleaui didn't play this year, and Hasler's made them a better club. There's no question about that. I think the Tigers will be better. Now, that sounds absurd. They ran last for the third time, but if you said to me you can have a spine of Coruscant, Luai, Galvin, and Buller, and that's your spine, and with Richardson's been around the block, he'll start putting the pieces around that spine. I'd like to suggest they won't finish last next year. They should be better next year. If they can keep that spine on the field, they'll upset a few. Now, do I think they're going to make the 8? No, I don't. But my point here is it's a very, very competitive league. Look around. Souths, they need to reset themselves. The New Zealand Warriors need to reset. Both of those clubs have the ability to make the 8 next year if they reset correctly. They have the talent.
So, Broncos arguably need a reset as well. They're one of the biggest clubs in the comp.
They'll need a reset, and they will do it. And if Maguire goes there, as they're mentioning, I think they'll do a reset. So you've got these clubs that are proving, you've got clubs that are resetting, and then you've got, sitting up the top there, you've got Storm, Panthers, Roosters. Well, they're always going to be very, very competitive. So when you look at a macro view of the challenge ahead for the Eels, it's substantial because, everything's relative. It's a competition. You have to compete. So it's going to be, that's why I say it's a slow burn. I don't see within the context of all those clubs I've just talked about that the Eels are going to go from 15th to 4th. I don't see it. But I do think they can improve. And I think fans don't like to have a longer term perspective, but when you're in the game running clubs, sometimes, again, you've got to be realistic and pragmatic. Like when I came to Parramatta, I didn't think we were going to win the comp. I just didn't. All I wanted to see, I said to the group of fans at one thing we had, I said, look, I can't promise you wins. I can't promise you victories and results. I said, what I can promise you is we'll run the club professionally, we'll run it ethically, and we'll try and set it up for success on the football field, because at the end of the day, our core business is football. Our goal is not necessarily to be the richest football club, but to get on-field results for you fans. That's our goal. We're a football club. You've got to win games. So the challenge was to make sure you've got to see improvement. You want to see effort week to week on the field, and you want to see improved results over the course of the season. And hopefully that's what's going to happen to the Eels.
The frustration, I guess, from a fan's point of view, our next door neighbour, the Penrith Panthers, are on to their now 5th grand final appearance, potentially going to win their 4th grand final in a row. And this powerhouse that they've become, I feel like Parramatta should be that power. I think we've got all the ingredients there to become that ultra powerhouse of the comp that all NRL clubs are very, very jealous of. The supporter base, the on and off the field, all everything together. If we can get it all right, we'd be that powerhouse that I think we deserve to be. Well, can you pinpoint just what the Panthers have done so right, being so close to Parramatta's door, that they seem to have got everything so right? And I guess in a way, Parramatta, whether it's only 2 or 3 things they've got slightly wrong, but looking at now the difference of it.
Yeah, look, full credit to Penrith. They've done a great job. And, I think Phil Gould, he takes a lot of flack off some sections of the media, but I don't think there's any doubt that he was a vital piece of setting Penrith up. He was very big on the pathway system. And whilst Phil left before this 3 or 4 year run, just before this 3 or 4 year run commenced, there's no doubt some of the seeds that were sown there by Phil. And the other guy that did a great job out there was Matty Cameron, working in concert with Phil. He's their general manager of football. He oversees all the football operations. Brian Fletcher is CEO. He overviews the entire club along with the Leagues Club. So, Brian, he's a very smart business guy. And I think Matt Cameron has done a terrific job to put together the football program. They've been a very stable club. They've got the most out of their junior league. I think they've done a better job at that than Parramatta's done. And of course, that's Parramatta's, again, Parramatta are working on that. People think they're neglecting their juniors. They're not. They're not neglecting their juniors at all. I know for a fact that they're putting systems and that in place to not only look after their juniors from participation level, but to get the elite juniors out of there that can potentially roll through into the junior representative program, the Jersey Flag, the SG Ball and the Harold Matthews, and then hopefully onto the NRL team. The other thing Penrith have done is that they've done some strategic recruitment in Western New South Wales, particularly out in that Dubbo type area where they've got Isaiah Yeo. They've picked up, I think, they picked up a number of players from outside the Penrith Junior League area as well. Dylan Edwards is from, I think he's from Bellingen or Dorrigo. He's not from Penrith. Anyway, the point being, even clubs like Penrith and the Broncos and all these clubs with massive junior areas, including Parramatta, they don't just rely on their juniors. They go outside. They're looking everywhere. The Broncos look everywhere. And so you're looking for good juniors in your own area. You're looking for good juniors anywhere in Australia, particularly southeast Queensland and western New South Wales, country areas of New South Wales. So every club's a recruitment club. Penrith have just done it very, very well. Now, in addition to identifying and bringing that talent in, they've done a very good job with their coaching staff of making sure as they've lost key players like Coruscant, Kickow, Burton, Crichton, that they've had young fellas ready to go and they could drop into the system. The other thing they got very fortunate with was when Gus hired Ivan Cleary in 2012, Ivan brought his son with him, who was about 12. So, maybe one of the great pieces of good foot, besides all the good management around Penrith, if Gus hadn't hired Ivan Cleary, let's say the Eels had hired Ivan Cleary back then, you'd have got Mitchell, you'd have got Nathan Cleary. Now the Eels are very lucky; they got Mitch Moses, and I think Mitch is elite. But my point being, that was one bit of good fortune that the Panthers had. Having said that, Matt Cameron, Phil Gould, Matt Cameron, Ivan Cleary, they've done a phenomenal job, and you only have to sit back and applaud what they've done as far as bringing those players through, coaching them, and making them feel like they are part of the club and part of the furniture. The way you hear them speak about the club, Isaiah Yeo and Dylan Edwards and these people, it is a very, very special place to be at the moment. But Parramatta has that opportunity. When I went to Parramatta, I came back from the US to take the Parramatta job. I said, this is probably one of the few jobs I'd take to come back into the NRL because I've always thought Parramatta was the sleeping giant, the powerhouse to come. Yeah. And I still think they will be. They started on that path and they eventually made the 2022 grand final. I think everyone thought, well, here we go. This should be, 5-10 years of consistent success. Well, it just shows how hard it is in the NRL. And look, this happens in the NFL as well. Outside of one or two clubs over in the NFL, it can be very, very cyclical. Clubs can make a Super Bowl and they miss the playoffs the next year. That's what makes sports so attractive to be part of. It's the competition. It's not easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So look, I think, as I said, I think there's still a lot of positives around Parramatta. If I was Parramatta, to your point, it has, and I used to say it at the time, they have a scale that other clubs don't have. Like even Penrith doesn't have the scale of Parramatta. Parramatta have way more fans than Penrith, whether by any measurement. So Parramatta has so much going for it that, I think the Parramatta faithful have to keep the faith, and hopefully with Riles coming in, they'll start a course of improvement. But I think it'll be a slower burn than the fans maybe hope for.
In regards to the Penrith Panthers, it's a huge jealousy thing. I feel like we know as fans how good they are being run. Whenever I take my Parramatta shirt off, I have to applaud them because, as you rightly said, it is absolutely phenomenal what they've achieved as a club and continue to do. And even like this year, they're losing another couple of key players to their Arsenal, and you already know you can't write them off again next year. They're going to be thereabouts. They're going to get things done, and if they might well be there again next year on the biggest stage. Now, for Parramatta fans at the moment, it's a very frustrating period in terms of it feels like a lot of fans are at each other. It feels like they're at loggerheads. There's blame going out there to the board, the Parramatta board. There's blame going. They don't know what they're doing. There needs to be change. There needs to be a big turnover. It needs to be a takeover. There's a new ticket. There's a make Parramatta again. what do you understand about this faction, I guess, this ticket, whatever it wants to be called? It seems to be on face value. There's a little promotion with the past players, which grabs a lot of Parramatta fans straight away, which is very tactical and very smart. I'll give the guy who's in charge of it that. But then you peel back some curtains and there's some few questionable things out there as well that I've heard rumors of, people who are involved, etc. What's your understanding at the moment about this whole Parramatta or make Parramatta again ticket? And is there dangers around it, especially the change? As you said, there's just got to give people some time, I guess. Give the Jim Saratinos, I guess, the Mark O'Neill, you got Sean McAdoff as well. Give them a bit more time, perhaps, or is now the sort of time to make changes at the top?
Look, I hear stories about this faction, and the moment I hear faction and Parramatta mentioned in the same sentence, I get reasonably upset, because the dramas around Parramatta basically since, really since the early 90s. Brian Smith, when he came in, I think Brian came in like 96. I think Brian Smith came in. He provided a lot of stability to Parramatta, and the on-field results that Brian was able to achieve, because Brian Smith's a very, very good football coach. I know he didn't win a comp, but he's a very good football coach, and anyone that's been coached by him acknowledges his knowledge of the game. Then as you moved into the early 2000s, the factionalism continued around Parramatta. Every time, basically since the mid-90s up to 2016, you had that period of 20-odd years where every time Parramatta had any type of election, you heard of the factions. And none of them seemed to be able to get on. None of them seemed to be able to come up with a strategy that seemed to make sense. And at the end of the day, what it took was the dysfunctionality of Parramatta, both at the Leagues Club and football level, at the board level. And the dysfunctionality manifested itself in governance issues, salary cap breaches, executives being disqualified, Leagues Club people doing the wrong thing. The whole thing was an absolute disaster. So, the factions were hanging around all that. And I think what Max Donnelly put in place with constitutional reform is the absolute right thing to do. My view is Parramatta can't go back to these factionalized days. Look, the reality is, if you went in behind the walls at Parramatta today, and I have a reasonable idea of what the mood would be like. They're not happy. They're not happy with the results of where the football's going. But now you have a club that, with their commercial partners, is very strong, and they have good reputation with the fan base. The fan base is huge. We have a lot of members. Parramatta is, I think, the biggest Sydney club for membership, even bigger than Souths. So there's a lot of fans that are sticking with the club. I don't think factionalism is going to repair Parramatta. And I don't think, quite frankly, repair is probably a too harsh a word. I think they just need to set a strategy with the board, Jim, Mark O'Neill, and Jason Riles. Just set their strategy and get on with it. That's, without doubt, that structure is the best structure for Parramatta. The idea of bringing in factions and having a coup, I think, is absurd. It is not good governance. And quite frankly, a lot of these people have no idea what they're talking about. With all due respect, they don't. They think they do, but they don't. And there's a lot of fans, and, maybe very blunt thing to say, but there's a lot of fans that love the club, but quite frankly, you don't want them running the club. They have no idea how to run a football club. And they'll say, oh, well, the current people have no, but that's not true. The board is quite an experienced board. Jim's been around the club. He came on the board when I was, just before I was appointed CEO. So I've known Jim for a long time. He's a good man. Mark O'Neill's been around football. Does that mean that they can't tweak their strategies around recruitment, retention, etc.? Yeah, I think they could probably do a few things there, do a few things differently. But I would find it very, very difficult to believe that any group of any faction would be able to come in and run the club any better. That's my, I put it this way, it's my view from afar. I would say they need time to fix this. And one of the big pieces, of course, is a new coach. Now, people often have the wrong view around the coach. They think, oh, well, the coach makes all decisions. The coach hires everybody, all the players, and the coach runs the entire football department. That's not how it works. In modern professional football departments, you need a strong head of football or general manager of football, Mark O'Neill's position, or in Matt Cameron's position at Penrith, or Phil Gould's position at Canterbury. You need that role. Their role is to look after the longer term management of the club from a strategic point of view, so that the head coach doesn't have to worry about it, so that the head coach is not taking 20 calls a day from player managers, so that they're not having to deal with wellbeing and education issues. They're not having to deal with recruitment and retention issues, so the head coach can focus on preparing the football team to win a game on the weekend. Unless you have that support around the head coach, he gets caught up in all these other things that take him away from, number one, building relationships with his players, and number two, setting the strategy to win the game on the weekend. So, look, this is a long-winded answer to your question around factionalism. It will not do Parramatta any good to be focusing all their intentions on fighting a faction, as opposed to turning their attention to running the club. So the existing management is Parramatta's best course out of this, and whether they need to change their strategies, only something you'd know if you're inside the building.
For the people that are listening, there'll be a lot of Parramatta fans that do listen to this podcast. I know that for sure. One thing I'll let everyone know as well is you need to make sure you're asking some serious questions about this faction and this ticket as well, and getting your actual answers, and not letting them run around the answers in a way, and giving you what you want to hear and not the actual truth behind the answers. And there's a number of things I could probably say about this, and I'm sure Bernie yourself knows exactly where I could go with this, but I won't go there at the moment. But just ask proper questions. Don't use emotion behind everything. I know it's been a frustrating 2 seasons. There's no doubt about that. We should be there, and I'm with you. I've been very, very vocal about it. We should be up there at the top of the ladder almost year in, year out. It's a very tough competition, but I believe we've got the finances behind us, the on and off the field, the personnel, the right ones. And in a way, I think what let us down this year and potentially last year was a lack of depth in some key positions, where I think this year already they've shown us with these first few signings, they've identified that. So look, change, is it needed? Potentially, but it's not necessarily personnel either. It could just be, as Bernie was mentioning, just little changes to the way they're thinking about things and how they went about things. And Brad Arthur's he was big on getting you big forwards in, giving them big money. For me personally, I didn't agree with that 100%. I thought that was a very risky way to go about things. I know forwards are a big piece of the pie, but do you give a few so much money into your cap? I think it hurt us a bit towards the end there, especially this year, where I think these guys are sort of, the depth is starting to come through. We've just signed a backup halfback, which was key this year that we didn't have. Isaiah Iongi coming from Penrith. Honestly, what a talent he is. If people have watched him, he's immense. So he's going to be really good there for Gutho if he does move in a different position. That's going to be awesome to have Isaiah there. Potentially the answer is give him another season to show us that things are working. And the head coach is a big change. Like we keep asking for change. I think that's huge. If you've sacked your head coach who has been there for over 10 or so years now, to a guy that has never been in around Parramatta, and he's been around success for a long time, that is a huge change in my opinion. In terms of, I guess, the factions and stuff, and just when you got to the club, I know you mentioned you got to the Eels and there was a lot of dark days, I guess. It was a hard time to be in and around that club. Can you inform everyone what the salary cap breaches were actually for? Because there's been a lot of, I guess, misconception around it, obviously being labelled cheats, etc. Because the passion towards the Melbourne Storm salary cap era and what happened there. But can you let people know what actually happened during that time?
Well, that all happened. That all happened before I came, and that was one of the reasons why I did come. I didn't spend a whole lot of time working out what it was. All I knew was that they had violated the cap. They'd paid certain players amounts outside of the club payment system, and they were paid by other organisations, and that's illegal. Everything you pay your player has to be paid through the club. You cannot be paying a player, for example, $250,000 a year through the club and then giving him $50,000 on the side from another company, and no one knows about it, but the guy is only doing it because the guy's playing for Parramatta and they have an agreement on that basis. That's just, well, number one, it's breaking the rules. It's just unethical and shouldn't be accepted. Everything that the player gets paid to play the game has to go through the club and through the salary cap. So the specifics were, my understanding, because they happened before I got there. But my focus was every single cent we paid was going through the club, and we were going to comply 100% with the salary cap orders. We had a lot of meetings with them. Our chief financial officer, Nikki Vandermeer, who's still with the Eels, she did a magnificent job with the salary cap, and she had a great relationship with the NRL around how to maintain that salary cap. So. And as CEO, and being so concerned about it, given that it had been a big problem for the Eels, I tried to be all over that when I was there, just to make sure that we were doing it properly. But Nikki, our CFO, Chief Financial Officer, did a terrific job around the salary cap. So, yeah, look, there were just a myriad of issues around the salary cap where the Eels were just not in compliance. They were paying players outside of the rules of the salary cap, which basically means they weren't paying them through the club.
It was a very dark time, and we're just going to make sure, as you said, those factions and stuff, you just got to ask the right questions and make sure we don't ever go towards those sorts of dark days, I guess, again, for the club. You also spent a bit of time there at the Roosters. I want to ask you and pick your brain with the Roosters side of things. A huge club, an absolutely huge club with huge personalities as well in there. Can you just explain to everyone a little bit about the time frame you were there at that club and just what it was like stepping in and basically being in charge of that huge club?
Yeah, I was. I'd been working as basically director of finance at the World Cup soccer organisation in America for a couple of years, and World Cups end. There's a finite existence of a World Cup. It ends. So that job was coming to an end at the back end of '94. So I'd actually reached out to John Quayle, who was then the chief executive of the Australian Rugby League, and actually John had been my under-23s coach when I played at the Roosters, before he went on to a very illustrious administrative career, resulting in him being the CEO of the Australian Rugby League. And I reached and said, look, mate, I'm done here. We're looking to come back to Australia. If you could just keep your eye open and see what's available. And then he came back to me a couple of weeks later. He said, look, I know Nick Politis very well. He's just come on board as the chairman about 6 months ago of the Roosters. He's looking for a CEO. So Nick had some business interests in the United States, and he was over in the United States not long after that, and he interviewed me, and we had a number of interviews, and I ended up coming back to be the CEO of the Roosters in October of 1994, believe it, about 30 years ago. That time's got away. Anyway, the Roosters had some tough times. The last couple of years before that, being 94. In 94, I think they finished 13th out of 16 teams in first grade and reserve grade. The club had been in a bit of disarray. There was time for a change. Nick had come on board as the chairman. He was the instigator of change, and he's a very intelligent person. He's a very driven person, and he's a very professional person. So he was trying to set up the Roosters to get back to where they were previously and where everybody thought they should be, running a very, very professional, successful organisation. So I think 2 months before I started, Phil Gould started. So you had Phil starting. I came in as CEO. We had Brian Canavan, very, very capable football manager. So basically under Nick's leadership, we set about trying to repair the Roosters. But the Roosters is a terrific club. Parramatta, just as an aside, when I went to Parramatta, I got a couple. So how do you compare the Roosters and Parramatta? I said, well, look, football clubs internally are full of very, very good people, very well-meaning, a lot of great people at Parramatta. I said, they all just want success for their club. They love their club and they want to be successful. So, Parramatta when I joined, had a lot of great people, and they still have a lot of great people. So just going back to the Roosters. So, we started to get things together at the Roosters. We missed the playoffs in 95, but from 96 through my time there at 2003, we made the playoffs 8 times, went to the final 5 times, 3 grand finals, 1 premiership. So we had a very, very successful run, but it was under Nick's leadership. Phil Gould did a phenomenal job for the 5 years he was there in rebuilding us. Graham Murray did a good job for 2 years. Ricky Stewart did a sensational job for 2 years. Ricky ended up getting us our premiership in 2002. Ricky went to 3 grand finals in a row at the Roosters, 2002, 3 and 4. He won the first one in 02, lost 03 and 04, but, amazing accomplishment to do that. But it was all on the back of a very, very strong, coordinated, focused club under Nick's leadership. And, it was, I was an East junior, I was a Roosters junior, so it was a terrific time for me to be a part of that club, and I loved the club. And then I left there at the end of 03. And just so people know, the Roosters are a very successful club, but one of the misconceptions about the Roosters is that they buy their way to success. Well, in many ways, it's just a fallacy. When we won the competition there in 02, the number of players that had played their first grade game at the Roosters, in other words, were, Peter Cusack, Simon Benetti. We brought over Nathan Carlos from the Eels when he was a reserve grader. We had Brian Fletcher, Luke Ricketson, Shannon Hegarty, Ryan Cross. All these guys had made their first grade debut. Suddenly they became big stars, and the rugby league community would say, "Oh, well, look at the Roosters; they got all these stars." And I would be saying, "Well, you've got to do put a bit of thought in this and doing a bit of analysis around this, and you'll find out that a lot of them, they were developed at the Roosters. Look at Jared Warrior-Hargraves. He had 6 games at Manly. He's had 300 at the Roosters. Look at the players they've developed there in their current squad. A lot of them, like, no one knew Joseph Manu. No one knew Daniel Tupu. No one knew Sam Walker. No one knew the Butcher brothers. No one knew Taylor May. No one knew Lindsay Collins. All before they came to the Roosters, they weren't stars. They've been turned into players. They've been developed at that club. So it's a little bit, I find it a bit frustrating, quite frankly, that they got all these stars, and how do they afford all those stars? Well, they've developed these people. And the other thing to remember too is that the Broncos, for example, every club is a recruitment club. If you have the biggest junior league like the Broncos or the Panthers, they all look outside. They all go outside. They're looking in their own backyard, but they all go outside. Adam Reynolds went to the Broncos. Isaiah Yeo was a Dubbo kid. He went to the Panthers. The Cowboys got Jonathan Thurston way back in 2005 from the Bulldogs. All these clubs with big juniors, they're still recruitment clubs. They recruit outside their own geographic area. So just specifically back to your question, the Roosters is a very, very well-managed club and still is today. And I think you see that in the way they can bring players in that people have never heard of, and over the course of a number of years, they'll develop them into very, very good players, and that's the art. It's what Penrith are doing. Penrith have the advantage, of course, over a club like the Roosters, and the Penrith's got a very large junior league. So Penrith have a plan A and a plan B. The plan A is, what have I got in my huge junior league? And if that doesn't work, I go and get an Isaiah Yeo out of Dubbo, or a Dylan Edwards out of Bellingen. The Roosters only have a plan B, which is their plan A is their plan B. They've got to recruit outside. But the unfairness of that situation is that when the Sydney clubs voted to expand the game in 1967 to include Penrith and Cronulla, and later on in 1988 to include Brisbane, Newcastle and the Gold Coast, and later in 1995 to include the Warriors, the Western Reds at that point came in, the Cowboys came in. These decisions to expand the game of rugby, and it's all been terrific. The expansion has been phenomenal. It's helped grow the game. It's been a wonderful, wonderful thing over the last 30, 40, 50 years. But initially, the old Sydney clubs, Roosters, Rabbitohs, Bulldogs, Sea Eagles, they were the clubs that voted these new clubs in. For example, when Penrith were voted in 67, they were given this monumental geographic area of Western Sydney. No one said to the Rabbitohs or Manly or the Roosters, "Oh, by the way, I know you got a small junior league. We'll give you more junior areas." No one did that. Yet they had the foresight to say, "No, growth of the game is good. We vote for it," even though they didn't get anything in return. So those old clubs, they often get criticised for not developing, but they dug the well. They dug the well for 80 or 90 years. And suddenly when expansion happens, other clubs get upset that these clubs don't have a big junior league and they're not expanding the game. It's just absurd. So I know I've sort of got off your question a bit there, but we were talking specifically about the Roosters. As I said, a terrific club, a great club, still very close to the club. But there's a place in our game for all these clubs. And when I went to Parramatta, as I said, terrific people. And Parramatta, I learnt then, I knew Parramatta had a scale, but having worked there, I realised what a scale it does have. It is a monstrous club. And to now have a great home ground, to have a centre of excellence that's going to be absolutely brilliant at Kellyville, to be starting the process and working through in continuing to improve their pathways is good. Look, I still think, I know Parramatta fans get frustrated with their performances sometimes, but I would still be very bullish on the Eels' future for Parramatta fans.
I hope you're right. I really do hope you're right, and it gives me a bit more confidence knowing that how great your footy mind is, that you have that confidence. It's giving me a bit more confidence. I want to ask you one quick question before we do anything, and I could honestly talk to you for hours, and I'm sure people would love to listen to you for hours, but we don't have hours, unfortunately. Just that sort of Super League time. I just wanted to know if you had any part of that Super League era that. Depends who you ask. It depends on the answer that they give you, whether it was a good or bad thing for the game. What do you remember of it, and what sort of part did you play in and amongst it?
Well, the irony is I started at the Roosters on the 1st of October 1994, and literally at that point, the Kangaroos had just left on a tour of Great Britain. Ken Arthurson, the chairman of the Australian Rugby League, was in England on that Kangaroo tour when he got a phone call and said, "We've got a problem. News Limited is trying to take over the game." He flew back from England. So I lived through the Super League war. And of course, I was with the Roosters, who were an ARL club, as were the Eels, when Dennis Fitzgerald was running the Eels. He was a very strong ARL person. So the Roosters and the Eels were on the Australian Rugby League side, not the Super League or News Limited side. Look, things like that are never really good for the game. The bottom line is that was a war between media moguls. Kerry Packer through Channel 9 had the TV rights. Pay TV was coming in, and Rupert Murdoch was part of Foxtel. He wanted rugby league on Foxtel. So he said, well, we'll take over the game. And so basically News Limited put a takeover attempt on the game. It really set the game back for a few years, 97, 98, and I think in 99, they got back together again. There was a peace deal. And I was at the Roosters through this time. It was a very, very challenging time because, the public, they weren't silly. They could see it was simply a battle between a couple of billionaires that wanted to control the media interest within the game. So it was not a good time for the game. The NRL had recently expanded to 20 teams in 1995. Part of the reconciliation was that they'd go back to 14. So clubs like the South Queensland Crushers, the Adelaide Rams, the Western Reds, they all went away. We had Melbourne Storm introduced because that was one of the teams that News Limited won in the thing. So at the end of the day, News Limited got what they want. They still have the Rugby League Today on Fox. That's all he wanted. Ironically, Packer did a deal, and it was obviously part of a three-way deal between himself and Murdoch and the Australian Rugby League at the time. He maintained the free-to-air TV rights, and ironically, in '97, when they had two competitions, Super League and the ARL, Packers Channel 9 broadcast both. So they had both competitions. Sanity prevailed in 1998, I think it was, and they got the competition back together again. And luckily, in that time since then, the game is absolutely today. The game's flying. The television numbers have never been high. The ground attendances have never been high. We're now in a position financially where all clubs are basically financial, which has never really been the case. Footy clubs used to regularly lose money, and leagues clubs would write a check at the end of the year to balance the books. That's not the case anymore. The game is really generating the revenue it deserves. And I think, we're now in a position where they're looking to expand, which I think will be a good thing. They just have to make the right choice on which clubs they let in, but they want to get to 20 teams. I think the Western Bears, I'm told, will come in as the 18th, and then they've just got to work out what the 19th and 20th. I know there's three possibilities. PNG is a very real possibility. And then you've got the South Island of New Zealand, which I think would be brilliant. And also the Western Corridor of Brisbane would be brilliant as well, because the AFL is spending a lot of money up there in our heartland areas. So if we can, at the moment, the AFL are spending a lot of money, and if you look at the macro strategic issues around rugby league at the moment, my very, very firm belief is that we should be pouring a ton of money into Western Sydney and into Southeast Queensland. If we protect those two heartland areas of rugby league with a massive strategic investment, AFL's dead in the water, because there is nowhere else of scale in Australia for them to grow if we dominate those areas. So while rugby league is extremely strong at the moment, now is the time to bite. Now is the time to go harder than ever on winning the hearts and minds of 6 to 12-year-old kids, because if you win those hearts and minds of those kids, suddenly their brothers and sisters, their parents are going to become rugby league fans, because little Johnny or Sally's driving them nuts because they love, the Dolphins or the Eels or whoever. And you're not only developing future players and participants, more importantly, you're developing future fans. Yeah. I really think strategically the NRL has to really focus very, very strong in those two fundamental areas. And I think New Zealand's another area. Rugby union, I think, is not as strong as it was in years past. The NRL, I'm told, the viewership numbers of NRL and the Warriors have done pretty good the last few years, not necessarily this year, but they sell out their games now. It's an amazing thing, and there's a lot of interest in New Zealand. So now I think there's a time to strike over there as well. You've got to strike while the iron's hot. So I think there's some strategic decisions the NRL have to make there around those. But yeah, look, it's an exciting time for the game, and I think there's still some real growth areas for the game as well to play off the back of the good position they're in now.
I 100% agree with you, mate. I think, look, it feels like the PNG expansion will happen at some point, but I'm with you. I think that Western Corridor Brisbane bid is just as important, I think, to the game in general. So it's an interesting one how they actually go about it, because we can't go to 21 teams. I think 20 is the limit. That's it. So it'd be interesting how they do go about this, because there seems to be 4 very viable options. I think, as you said, the Western Bears are done. I think they're pretty much going to be in there from, I think, 20.
The advantage of the Western Bears is it's twofold. Number one, you finally make the National Rugby League national.
Yeah.
Right. You go national, and Perth have shown in their prior iteration 30 years ago that there's an appetite there for rugby league, and they've shown it during Origin. And I think there's a lot of British expats, a lot of New Zealand expats that live over there that like our game. I think it's a no-brainer to go to Perth. And I think the second benefit of that is that you can engage with one of our foundation clubs, being the North Sydney Bears. No different than Melbourne sends their players to Brisbane. That's their feeder area, and that'd be no different than the feeder area for the Perth team would be the North Sydney Bears, who have a very, very, very good infrastructure. They're very good in New South Wales Cup. They played in the grand final yesterday, and they have a participation in the New South Wales Junior Rep level. So there's already made pathways there. It doesn't mean they won't have associated pathways in Western Australia, but I think that's a no-brainer to do that one. The real challenge is getting the other two right.
100%. I'm not. It's going to be very interesting what happens over the next 12 to 24 month period, and seeing what directions things go. It'd be funny to look back on this and just see where we do get to when it's this time in 2026 and where the game is headed. Bernie, as I said, I could continue to talk to you for hours on end. I really do appreciate you jumping on, spending a bit of time with myself and entertaining not just myself, but the viewers as well out there listening in, and getting to pick your brain and hearing your thoughts around a couple of really big clubs out there, the growth of the game over in America as well. That's a really good, interesting point that we did touch on. I've got to let you go. I've got to let you go enjoy your holiday and let you enjoy your family time. But I really do appreciate you jumping on, and I hope you have a great rest of your holiday and a safe trip back.
Thanks for having me on, Joel. Really enjoyed the chat, mate.